Hey there, and welcome to the Total Potential Podcast. It's Cole and Jake here with a super special guest, Michael Ostrolenk. His bio of incredible things that he does and is involved with is way too long to share here in this intro, but suffice it to say that Michael is an incredible human being. He is a marriage and family therapist. He is a master coach. He helps programs across the nation develop incredible transformational systems that they deliver to their clients. He has been my coach for the past couple of years. So lucky to have him. And I can say for certain that Michael will simultaneously blow your mind, and yet you'll know that what he says is so true that it cannot be denied. So let the light bulb moments begin. All right, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we dive all the way into couples and families and the work at hand, I'm so interested to know how you ever became interested in the field of psychology and development. And my understanding is that it was kind of like almost like lifelong interest. So where did this start for you?
Well, first of all, thank you, Nicole and Jake, for having me on your show. Greatly appreciate it. And I start my journey around age 9. Although if my mom was still around, she could actually start around age 5. But It's only retrospective to her. Like I don't remember that when I was 5. I'll start when I'm 9. I was fortunate to find a good therapist at the time because of health problems that I had and learning disabilities that I had. This is in the late 90s, so a lot of this stuff was brand new on the scene. There wasn't a lot of help around these things. Like presently, learning disabilities are well known. There's a lot of programs and stuff, but back in the day, there wasn't. But I had some learning disabilities, so I had troubles in school, and then I had some health problems when I was a little kid. And I found a really good therapist, Mrs. Lawson, when I was age 9. And she taught me biofeedback. She taught me guided imagery. She got me into meditation. She didn't call it mindfulness, but it was kind of a mindfulness practice. She also taught me focused meditation, not box breathing. We didn't have it back then.
Yeah.
But we used candles to focus our attention. She got me into the martial arts. And as a result of getting into the martial arts, my first 3 books of interest were Zen Mind, No Mind by Daisaku Suzuki, a book on Zen and the martial Zen. And I read it over and over again. And retrospectively, I probably have no idea what I was reading. Probably if I read it today, I still have no idea what I was reading. But for whatever reason, I was really drawn to the Zen tradition. Another book called Zen and the Martial Arts, which makes sense, Zen, but also the martial arts, because I was also studying the martial arts. And then a book on yoga. And I remember the cover had a guy doing yoga, and there's a yellow orange cover, but I don't remember the name of the book. But my, kind of her work taught me how to regulate self-regulation, or as we would say at self-mastery, as best as I could as a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old. That was kind of my first introduction to this space. Wow. And if you kind of track my history, there's the personal path, because from that moment forward, I was always interested in the martial arts and Eastern philosophy and self-regulation, biofeedback, all the kind of cutting edge thing is really cutting edge back then, you can imagine. And then I had another path more public, but those kind of diverged, and I always kept private one, the kind of the personal development space, growing interest from 9 until I'm 50, almost 52. So a long time.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so then your interest in that leads to pursuing that in college. How did you decide this is not only what I want to do for my personal practice, but I want to somehow experience this
professionally
with helping others professionally? Yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it took the death of 2 people for me to kind of course correct. But after college, political science, history, a minor, I think business minor, kind of the normal, those kind of things, always with a private interest in the personal development, alternative spirituality, alternative medicine, always reading those kind of things. And I did an interview with the government, and the gentleman I interviewed with was a friend of the family friend. And he says, "Oh, you should go get your MBA. This is in the 80s. MBAs were really big back then. That way you can come back into the government at a higher position." So it's okay. So I started getting an MBA, and I didn't like the program, but that's what I was supposed to do. So I was doing really well in the program. And unfortunately, a good friend of mine since I was kindergarten was murdered. And then a month later, a teacher committed suicide. So it's kind of threw me. to dark night of the soul. It's kind of what it's called clinically.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of look at my life going, wow, like I have this path. It's not really my path. It's the path that's shown to me by others. And I really don't want that path. And I looked at the MBA program. I was like, what do I like about it? And there's kind of the more psychological parts around management. I'm like, but I don't want to manage people. Like, I don't really, I mean, nothing wrong with business, pro free market, all that kind of great stuff. But it wasn't like my calling. Like, really, the psychological piece was really my interest. It always has been since I was a kid.
Mm.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to drop this program and I'm going to look into psychology, but not the traditional APA approved schools of psychology. But my interest is like transpersonal psychology, the spiritual psychology, or somatic or body psychology, kind of the alternatives, which were way alternative back then, less so now. And next thing I know, I dropped out of my MBA program with a couple months left, headed west, studied in California, and did all my graduate work there and my postgraduate studies. And I'd say, back on track to a certain extent of what came natural to me as a kid in terms of my interests.
Yeah.
Although I circle back to the whole government thing later, which we can discuss if you like.
So interesting.
Yeah.
I'm so curious because what you just described, this path that you're on and you're kind of supposed to be on, this is the story that we run into all of the time.
Yeah.
And then you have these life events that click like, holy shit, how did I get here? Why am I living this way? So is this experience, is that the most common thing that you see in both the couples work and individual client work? This like, I'm this one thing, but I don't actually want to be this one thing? Or is there something broader than that that kind of circles people into the work of mastery more often?
So I'd say that it can be one or two streams. I'm sure there's 3 or 4 or 5 different streams, but one or two that I've noticed more than others. One is a life crisis, divorce, health condition, loss of something, something major that kind of shakes the ground of their very being and gives them the opportunity to kind of question how they're living their life. Now, a lot of people will use that, kind of regress back to clinical terms, lower, less complex stages of ego development. So they don't necessarily grow in development, they fall back to more comfortable places, which is fine, no judgment. That's a lot of people do. But some people use the opportunity like, holy moly, like this isn't working for me. I'm going to reflect deeply on my life and create a new path for myself. So that's a lot of people have, like, they run into life that way. That opens them up. And others, it seems like there's a small segment of the population that they're naturally inclined to make questions of everything in their life.
Mm.
So it's not that they have to have a life condition that smacks them in the face, but they question things naturally. And through that natural progress of questioning things, they might look at their like, oh, how am I living? Well, is it really in alignment with my values? Or how's my family life coming along? Or how's my work life? Whatever they might be questioning. There's an actual curiosity, inquisitiveness that has them question, reflect, and they make the course changes. That's a small segment of the public. Mostly it's people who are just like, crap, life just kicked me somewhere.
Yeah.
Caused me a lot of pain, and I'm going to open up, look at it differently.
Yeah.
But Michael, I'm very interested in that, because the thing that came to mind too when you were saying that is I actually just was having this conversation with my son this morning about, are you in the driver's seat of your life, or is you look into dad as like, how does dad feel about what I'm doing, or mom, and coming from an athletic background, as you talk about that, right, of like, is it these choices or where I'm at because this is where I want to be, or this is just kind of the path that people have pushed me down. And being an athlete, that is kind of the way it was. It's like, hey, this is what you're supposed to do, this is how you're supposed to live. If you want to make it, this is what you have to do. And you kind of get stuck in this. And it's taken me almost 12 years of my life post sport to get back in the driver's, get back in that kind of control of my own life. And I'm just curious on that. Like, I mean, is, when you, especially with like little kids, like my son's 12, the way that we talk to them as parents, or what we're saying of like, how do you create that fire like that you had at 9 years old of like, yeah, I can kind of see, like, I'm very interested in this. Like with my son, he hasn't really clearly shown us as his parents, like, this is what he's obsessed with. But it's really kind of a nerve-wracking thing for me as his dad, because it's like, I don't want him to think that my what I did in my life or what my wife did in her life. That like that's the path he's got to shoot for, you know. So there's just
yeah.
really,
First of all, I think it's awesome, Jake, that you're asking the questions out loud to your son. I mean, I think that's like the first huge step that you can do, because you're possibly freeing from the spell of like, oh, I have to do whatever my mom and dad did or whomever. Like, so
yeah,
you're giving them the opportunity to like reflect. So good on you for doing that, as opposed to like, oh, 20 years from now, he's like, oh God, what have I done with my life? I mean, and maybe he
yeah,
won't 20 years from now, you know, maybe he's happy with whatever he's doing. But like, you're giving him the opportunity to like discover what's of interest to him, his daimon is, you know, like comes without, and then like kind of course correct based on that. And you know, got to consider this. He's 12, you said?
yeah,
Yeah. So obviously when he's 1, you're not gonna be able to ask him this question. You ask him 7 or 12 or 15, you're gonna get different answers, because the cognitive capacities and emotional resilience and intelligence are different. But the fact that you're asking at 12, right before he heads into puberty, I would imagine close to puberty somewhere, is huge. Because once he's into puberty and all the hormones lock into place and set him on that path of like being a young man, it's harder to kind of break through the hormonal stuff. But if he's thinking about this prior to the hormones kicking in, and he can figure out like what drives him, I don't mean hormonally, but like, you know, soul, at the soul level, that's awesome.
yeah,
So good for you for even just asking that question. And, you know, speaking outside of just you and your situation, Nicole knows that I'm a huge fan of like unschooling as a alternative to the conventional schooling movement. And whether you have your kid in a public, private school or unschool, you can still use the methodology of unschooling in various parts of their life and just see if you give them the space. Because presently I notice like a lot of parents have like their kids plugged in. Oh, we do this and we do this and we do this and we do this. And okay, great. It's great to have like 500 sports you play and 5 instruments and what all those things. Nice. But is there space in the child's life to play, just to play, whatever that means for the kid, and to discover what's of interest to them without having to have that kind of like rigid uh, pattern of behavior for the child, which just leads them into an adulthood. Like, oh, this is what we do. We do this, we do this, we do this. You asking the question early enough, giving him the space, or any parent giving the child the space to see what emerges in that playful space is awesome, because it can help break the spell of, oh, when you're this age, you do this. When you're this age, you do this. When you go to college and then you get a job and you have to do this, and this is the way you have to structure your life, which is fine for 90% of the people. If that's what they want to do, no judgment, cool. But if you can create the space for that exploration early on and then support it, because if you guys know the unschooling movement, it's like you help the child discover what is innate in them, their interest, and then you support it. You facilitate that interest. You can do that even if they're in public school or private school.
Michael, in the unschooling vein, I'm really curious because in family life, my current experience is that there's kind of these two paths that are super important to developing both as individuals and within the family. One being that this path of curiosity with our kids, like giving them the space to tell their own story, and not a story that's just conditioned or is just a pattern that's been in your family for 1,000 years. But there's simultaneously this need, like you have to be doing the work yourself, because otherwise this path over here is really hard to cultivate, or it still has a story. And so kind of these two things emerging at one time, it's kind of a lot, but it's also really exciting. And part of me thinks like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like if there's a place to start, what stands out to you as like a first line kind of like get the ball rolling in the right direction?
I'll go back to something Jake said in terms of, oh, you know, he's 12 and I asked him questions about his own path as opposed to programming him based on what me and my wife think is or have done. So asking those questions is really important, but it's how those questions are come through the individual. And this is to your point, Nicole, is even more important. And I don't mind picking on you, Jake, but like if you would have said, you can do whatever you want as long as you do it my way, like if that's the kind of the tone, like you don't say it exactly that way, but that's the underlying message, because you haven't done the inner work to free yourself up from the possibility that, oh, there could be a path for this child different than what I think is the right one, whatever that means.
Yeah.
So even if you have cognitively like, oh, I want to give the space to my child to be curious and support, facilitate their curiosity and find their own path in life, but you are still coming from that very rigid place of family conditioning and cultural conditioning, that's going to come through more than your words. So it's both what we say and how we say it, but also how we just show up in our lives, in our coupledom and in the family, like how we actually do what we do, not just what we say. So when they say, do what I say, not what I do, like, oh no, it's actually opposite.
Yes.
That doesn't really work very well.
Yeah.
Unless you want the kid in therapy, like 20 years from now. So looking at yourself as a parent or in a coupledom and asking where the rigidities, the contractions and constrictions of my own system, which make it more difficult for me to be free in my own life, free in the coupledom, to be an exemplar for my children about finding their own path and finding their own curiosity and living from a heartfelt space, or whatever the things are in your family dynamic. But yeah, the inner work along with working with the child is really, really important.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost like because I would say like my journey the last 12 years has been like unschooling, right? Like, so in a way that, and I guess this is more of an open-ended question for you, Michael, but in a way that's kind of how we can lead as a parent, right? Of like, hey, I'm on the same journey as you are, just at a different age in my life or a different stage in my life, but I'm going to lead by example by doing the same thing I'm asking you to do. I'm unschooling myself. I'm finding like you said, finding my own purpose, finding my own passion, attacking my life in a different way for the first time. And, hopefully I can save you 30 years of whatever.
So I think that's great, because you're just being transparent and honest, and it's obviously stage development or age appropriate, because you're going to have a different conversation with a 5-year-old than a 10-year-old than a 15-year-old, obviously. Hopefully it's obvious. Maybe it's, for some people it might not be, but obviously you should have a different conversation with different stages of their development. But the name of my coaching program is called the Emergent Human, because I think we constantly emerge to adapt to the changing life conditions. And I think you make the point of my program perfectly, because I could imagine, Jake, like 5 years ago, even though you're on the path of de-schooling yourself, you're a different place than you are 2 years ago, than you are now, than you will be 3 years from now, 5 years from now. It's an unfolding process, never-ending unfolding process. And by being honest and authentic and open about that, your child can see that. Like, oh, it's not like there's a final stage or state we get into. It's like it constantly unfolds. And as my father, I can see him, like he's learned lessons along the way and does course corrections. That's freeing for me. Because what if I get on a course and I think it's the right one for me, and like, oh wait, it's not. But the message I got is like, oh yeah, you can do a course correction one time and then you're stuck. No, like you constantly reflect back on your life, your values, how you want to live, lifestyle design, and you can keep course correcting. Now, obviously, there are obligations if you're within a family dynamic. I would hope. For some people, it doesn't. You can just do whatever the fuck you want. Sorry,
It's
but
okay.
ultimately, you should take into consideration your family members, your children, your spouse, and stuff. But if you do it as in the family system, you can model it to each other, like these course corrections that are possible, and the new learnings that are possible, and you can adapt to changing life conditions, and that you are not perfect. None of us human beings are perfect. And that's a nice message for our kids. Like, oh, wait, they mess up too. And they acknowledge it and they make course corrections and they're okay. I can too. I don't have to have that, like, there's no such thing as a perfection gene, but I'll just call it perfection. Like, I don't have that perfection gene in me. Like, I have to do it right all the time. And I have to have that kind of rigid approach to life. No, I can kind of relax a little bit, let go of some of the contractions in my system and just adapt.
What do you think, Michael? Because so one thing that stands out in the family dynamic and in the context of what you're just saying is like, my experience is that you cannot avoid the work in your family system, because everything that pushes your buttons, everything that reveals itself to you is like so available right on the surface. And yet change in that dynamic can be really challenging. So what about that system makes change feel hard?
Well, great question. And I'd say the fact that you and Jake are conscious, that you can see the need to, or the ability to adapt to the triggers in your life and grow and develop, that's unique. Like, I wish
99% of the people were like that, but most people are not like that. They're stuck in their ways. No value judgment. That's just the way most people live life. They're very conservative, and I don't mean politically, just energetically. Like, this is the way this is our habits. This is the way we show up in the world. This is what we do. And if you guys remember from rules, roles, and identities, there are identities we carry in our life. One way to think about them is kind of survival strategies, which emerged from our childhood, which helped us learn how to deal with the world, the real perceived threats. We create a mask that allows us to function in the world. Behind the mask is our kind of authentic self, but that's kind of a scary thing to express sometimes because you didn't get the proper feedback, proper nourishment at certain times from our family of origin and our coaches and our friends, and et cetera, et cetera. So most people are not like you guys. That's my first point. The second thing is, I find in a lot of couples that there's a lot of communication that occurs inside each other's heads, not with each other. So like you'll talk to one spouse and they'll have this whole story, and it's a completely different story than the other spouse. You're like, well, you guys live in the same house. That's really interesting. There's not much communication going on. And the ways that these spouses are locked into place with their identities, their survival patterns lock them into place and come together, and it locks that into place too. And it's a safer place to be. But someone like you, Nicole and Jake, you're like, oh, I want to wake up to possibilities of evolving and growing. And you can say to yourself, like, I can use, and I don't mean use in a manipulative way, but I can use a relationship as a mirror to look at myself to say, hey, here's my contractions, here's my rigidity, here's my lack of skills and communication, here's my lack of self-awareness, and I can use that to reflect and develop that awareness and change my dynamics and how I want to show up in the world, which is wonderful. Like, yes, let's use in a positive way the relationships in the family system to wake us up to other ways of being in the world, more loving, more compassionate, more caring, more authentic, all those fun buzzwords.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say too, it's not just the path of the monk, like, oh, I'm by myself and I can use these relationships to wake me up. It's like, no, you're the family life. Like, there is something almost like it's a unique entity in and of itself, whether it's the couple or the family itself. I mean, it could just be a couple, but a couple and the family itself as a unique entity that needs nourishment. So it's not just the agenic person using the system to grow and develop, although that's important. It's like, no, we actually need to grow and develop this system, whether it's the couple or the family as well. It needs specific nourishment, which requires us as members of the system to be awake enough to say, what does this system need to grow and develop? Which requires us as individuals to be awake to say, what do I need to grow and develop? So it's like, it's like a self-referential supporting loop of sorts that grows the whole system up.
It's interesting too, because what a great thing to be aware of, even like with your spouse. You can still have it after knowing my wife or being with my wife for 17 years. You could still feel the trigger, and all of a sudden the mask comes on where you're like, even though it's like the most vulnerable relationship you have in your life, or should be one of the most vulnerable. But if you can recognize that, like you were saying, you have these constant loops in your life, right? Like, well, that's interesting. Why did I react that way when she said this or this happened or whatever? And then I would guess that if you could have that communication with each other, right? Of like, hey, I reacted like this and I'm not really sure where that came from, but we're going to talk through it or whatever. I mean, having that open dialogue with your family is huge, I would assume, right?
So that's really important. So, when I say that people have like this whole stories in their own head, they actually don't share with their partner, and that both partners have their own stories, and they're like, oh my God, how do we actually mix? Having the ability to communicate. Let's just stick with what you just said, because I think it's brilliant. It's like, wow, when you say X, I notice that I'm triggered. Here's how I'm triggered. And Nicole, we've walked through this like through the UM stuff, and with you, Jake, too. It's like, oh, I can say this makes me angry, and I'd say, okay, that's nice. I don't know what you mean by angry. How does it show up inside you? And you could describe to your partner, in this case me, because maybe we're having this conversation, like, oh, anger shows up this way. Tightness in my jaw, restricted in my breathing, my belly gets tight. Here's the thinking pattern that emerges. Whatever the emotion is, and then the somatic expression of the emotion. If you could actually create a safe space with your partner, that you could share not only the word I'm angry, and the story behind I'm angry, like you did this, or you did this, or you didn't do this, which is all interesting. But like how it shows up inside of you as an individual. Talking about depths of intimacy which are possible, because most people might I'm angry, okay, and then they stop there, and or they might tell the story like I'm angry because you did X or you didn't do X, which is all important stuff. But like if we can go even deeper than that, and you can be so much more aware of how the trigger shows up inside of you, and then you develop the awareness of like, oh, like, okay, I'm triggered, and I become like this whatever person I am when I'm triggered, like, you know, and it spirals out of control with my wife, or if it's a husband with the wife, vice versa. If I can interdict the worm process for all our folks, you know, I can witness it, I can interdict, and I can change the inner state, and I can lock that into place. So I'm showing up no longer as triggered as I used to be. So it's not like 10 minutes down the road, I'm triggered, my prefrontal cortex isn't working right, I'm saying all kinds of crap I shouldn't be saying, what am I doing? It's like, yeah, okay, at least you're aware. And you're 5 minutes into it, you're like, oh God, what am I doing? And then like, you know, like finally, like, oh, I'm about to be triggered, like my spouse gives me that look or says something or whatever he or she does, and like, I'm about to be triggered, and I can see what's gonna happen, the spiral. And then I can stop, and I can change my state, my structure, my posture, my muscle tone, my thinking system, my breath pattern, all the stuff we learn, and I can show up differently. But I also have to give, permission is not the right word, give space for my partner to do the same thing, which requires a really interesting conversation for you and your partner to sit down and say, hey, I'm trying something new. This isn't working for us anymore. I get triggered, you get triggered, we trigger ourselves, we spin down the toilet. Like, let's try something new. And when I try some new things, I'm unskilled at it. Like, I'm going to effing suck because here's my patterns. I've been doing this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I'm going to try new things. Can we have permission with each other to practice new things? So can we create a safe space? Which is a huge conversation to have with a partner, because you have to define what safe space looks like. Like, are there words that you might want to use to say, hey, this isn't working for me this very moment. Hey, can I step away from this conversation? Because yeah, I got my breathing down, but I'm still being triggered or whatever. But I want you to know when I say, hey, this isn't working, I need to step away from this conversation. It's not I'm stepping away from the marriage. I'm not like, I don't want to trigger your abandonment wounds. It's like, you know, we need to have some words that we use to explain to the other person, like, hey, this isn't working for me this very moment. I need to step away from, literally leave the room, recollect myself. You can do whatever you need to do. We can come back for this conversation, which is a conversation I've had with couples that I work with, because one will try that, like, hey, this isn't working for me, I need to leave. And the other person goes, oh my God, they're leaving the marriage. And the person didn't say I'm leaving the marriage, but that's what they hear.
Yeah.
You know, like, because they're abandonment wounds. It's like, wow, how can we have conversations to create safe space? And part of that too is creating a safe space where we can co-regulate each other. Like, how can I help support your system to calm itself down so we can have an in-depth conversation, crucial conversation, as we call it at about whatever the topic is. Co-regulation could mean let's breathe together for a few minutes. Are there ways we can touch each other, which calms the system down, goes from sympathetic activation to parasympathetic activation? These are all fun, really cool conversations to have, then practices to learn how to do, because most people aren't taught how to co-regulate. I mean, Nicole, you're probably, as a mother, you know, unconsciously knew how to co-regulate your baby. I mean, I don't want to get into breastfeeding and stuff like that, but like breastfeeding or holding the baby to your chest is a way to regulate their system, to keep teaching them to calm themselves down, because the baby doesn't have the ability to regulate itself because it's the baby.
Yeah.
Right? So it uses the environment, in this case, the mother. But like, as an adults, we can learn to help each other regulate each other, calm ourselves down, get into sympathetic, parasympathetic activation, get our prefrontal cortex back online, and keep those conversations going. And I can get into, I'll stop for a second, but I'll also mention heart math as a cool tool if you want me to offer that too.
I love that idea. I'm also not only in my own practice, but in what you just described, there's so much intimacy that could be derived from being willing to just do the uncomfortable together, or like, hey, this is going to be super weird. And that's on kind of the quote unquote, because I don't love these terms, but like negative energy side, like, ooh, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm whatever. But then what about like on the flip side of, hey, when we do this thing as a family or as a couple, it feels amazing. Like, how do we create more of that? What's the language we use? What's the, like there becomes this whole spectrum that the couple gets to go through, which I mean, the level of like connection and intimacy and everything that's available in that is, I mean, I would like all of us are looking for that, right? Like that level of human connection and being seen and seeing another person. I mean, it's just like almost, yeah.
Yes. And so before I get into heart math, can I just share an exercise I do with my couples?
Yes, please.
Okay. And this I learned from my mentor, Dr. Stuart Sabatsky. He's a scholar of Kundalini Yoga, the original yoga tradition, not the one taught here in the States for longer orgasms and bigger erections and stuff, but like the true yogic system. So I give him full credit for this exercise. I will have my couple at the very beginning of every session, literally, and I mix it up depending on what's going on for them, and I mix up the exercise a little bit, but I'll have them face each other. And I'll do hand on heart, and I always tell them give consent. You have to consent to be touched by the other person. Because it's a good reminder, like you've been married for a long time, you just automatically do stuff like, oh, maybe they don't want to be touched at this very moment. So you ask for consent to hand on heart. Both people have hand on heart. You do eye contact and you breathe together. And I vary it different ways. But I do that for a couple of different reasons. One is they come into the session usually with stuff going on, whether it's life stuff like I'm stressed out, work is hard, kids are blowing up, or marriage is blowing up, whatever it is. It's like, let's reconnect at this very moment. Let's breathe together. Let's connect with the eyes. That's the way to the soul. Let's connect with the heart. So you're actually touching the other person. There's the energetic considerations just for the touching person. So you're connecting with the heart chakra. You're connecting with the sixth chakra. You're connecting to different energetic systems through the breath. And I literally have them just breathe together for about 2 minutes. And it calms their whole system down. They co-regulate themselves. And then I have them face me. And they're a different couple than showed up on the computer screen if I'm doing this virtually. Then probably showed up running into the room, turning on the camera, getting together. And they're in a much better state to then deal with their challenges. Mm-hmm. And the challenges, it's interesting, Nicole, and I love the fact you said, in quotes, like the negative stuff, anger, frustration, whatever it is. And I always put those in quotes because I don't like the positive emotions and negative emotions. We just have emotions. We can get into that conversation later. They have effects. We should be aware of the effects. Obviously, you don't want to walk around like all day long, angry for weeks at a time because there's negative consequences health-wise. But on the flip side, if you want to look at the positive stuff, I have clients, both individuals and couples, who, as much as anger or sadness or grief was not allowed in their family of origin, like, oh, I'll give you something to be angry about, or no, boys don't cry, whatever the story was growing up in their family, the positive emotions can also be like haram or against the rules of the family. There's nothing to be happy about. There's no joy in this life. Whatever it could be like, I don't know that every family's different, but the message could be like, there's nothing to be happy about. Life sucks. Life is hard. Joy is no good. Like, don't have pleasure in the physical body. We have a whole bunch of religions that don't particularly like pleasure in the body unless it's very prescribed. Not to get into those kind of things, but there's messages from our culture, there's messages from the family of origin. Even the positive things can be against the rules. Yeah. So to get individuals to get into their body and feel pleasure and joy and even bliss is awesome. But then, as you said, like, oh, can we get a couple to get together and do these things? And that's where a lot of the nonverbal hand touching work that I do with couples comes in, because you can't necessarily talk your way into bliss. I mean, I'm sure you could, but it's hard to talk your way into a blissful state or joyful state. But with proper breathing patterns, as you know, Nicole, because I know you've been studying breathing for a long time, and movement of the energy in the body, and posture changes and physical touch, you can help release the energetic flows of your partner, and they can do the same for you, and you just get into a really nice state and support that state. So you can go from like neutral to happy and joyful to blissful just by doing some of these cool exercises.
Yeah. I love that. What about, Michael, the family system or the couple system where there's only one party who's like willing to participate? Because we see that a lot.
Good question. Good question.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I like to call it like the Tony Robbins effect. You go to a workshop, you have major breakthroughs, and you show up Monday, and you're like, oh my God, I'm a new person. But then your husband or wife is like, no, you're not. And your kids are like, no, you're not. And your workmates are like, no, you're not. Your boss is like, you better get back to how you were Friday before you left for the stupid retreat you did. So it's really hard to grow and develop on your own. It's even harder to grow and develop, as you've already just pointed out, if you don't have support from the family system. So what I like to try to do is like, so it might be hard at the beginning to get a spouse to fully support the changes that you're trying to make in your life, because it's a threat to them and how they know you and their identity with you and the family dynamic at the time. And if you can understand that, you can have compassion for the other person, why they might not want you to change, because maybe they're afraid that you change enough, you're going to leave them. That's understandable. But can you find, like, if there's 10 lines of change that you're working on, can you find one that the spouse can buy into? And like, maybe it's just the dietary changes. Maybe it's sleep. Maybe it's exercise. Maybe it's a spiritual practice. Maybe there's got to be one of those 10 or two of those 10 where they'll be like, oh, not only will they be interested in it, maybe they'd lead. They're already doing it. So it's not like you have to get them to buy into your stuff. Maybe you just dive into their stuff and support them, and you both grow together in that line of development. You want to look at it that way. And that helps the other person go, oh, wait, they're interested in what I'm interested in. Cool. They're going to support me in what I'm working on. Cool. Or we can figure it out together. Maybe it's like we both have interest in it, but we don't know if we're doing it. We can do it together. But you're creating, it's a co-regulation thing. Like you're creating some safety for them and support with them, with you, to move you both in a new direction in one area of your life. I find, it's like Dennis Stoica, 1% better, or is it 10% better every day? What's his book?
Yeah, 1%, the 1% warrior or something like that.
Yeah, 1% better every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you can find that 1% in that one line that you can work with your partner on, or a coach can help you work with your partner on, I think that's the best way to go. Because a fire hose approach for most people, for individuals won't work for most people, but let alone a couple can like, holy moly, what are you doing?
Yeah. When you think of all
Michael,
go ahead, Jake.
I was just going to say, that's kind of what you were saying about earlier, right? Of like, you can't really talk yourself into bliss, but like in something like that, that's where action can step up in a big way, right? Of like, I don't need to tell my wife that I'm going to support her in this. I'm just going to do it. Or, right? Like, we don't have to have these big in-depth, if she sees through action, like, man, I guess that was more like, what's your thought on that? Is that something where it's like the what you do, is as more important than all these super in-depth conversations all the time?
So I think you nailed it right on the head. I think action is more important than words. Yeah. So if you see something that can be done to support your spouse, go ahead and do it. Don't just talk about it. Because my guess, and this is not specific to you, Jake, but like my guess is like your spouse probably heard you a million times saying you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and she's like, or he's like, okay, great, I've heard that a million times, nothing gets done. Great, show them, don't just talk about it. Sometimes it does take crucial conversations because it could be a complete course change. It's like if your spouse wants to lose weight, and you got to do the via negative and change the whole course of like grocery shopping and what's in the pantry and what you order in or out, and like all the stuff around food, that takes conversation. Like you probably don't want to just go into the pantry and just throw out stuff. Go to the grocery store and buy all the things you think he or she wants to have. That probably won't go over as well. But if you find out from them what their path includes, and then you could just go do it, or you need to have the conversation and then go do it. Yeah. But I love the action is just as or more important than just the talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. So we've kind of talked about like, okay, so we have the individual work and what unfolds there. We've talked a little bit about how you can bring that into connection in the like support of the couple one to the other. What about the couple like as an entity then going like the nourishment of the couple together, or the way the couple shows up together out in the world? Like what is some of the framework around that?
I think that's really important. And this goes back to the roles, and identity. We'll go to the rules, the roles part of the roles and identity. And I see this a lot, interesting with couples whose kids finally leave college, they go off to school. And like for the last 17 to 19 years, the couple has been focused not together as a couple, as a married couple, but focused outwardly at their kids as parents. And the kid or kids go away to school and they're like, they look at each other like, I don't know who the hell you are. Like, like we've been so focused on the role of being a parent, we have not looked at what does it mean to be a married couple throughout different times, periods in our lives. Broad generalization, but I find that to be true in a lot of people. And then divorce happens. Like, I don't know you, you don't know me. Let's like go our own way and go have some fun and new things in our lives. My preference would be like, no, let's like look at those roles repeatedly over time and keep reevaluating them and looking at the rules that lock those roles into place and the identities that we bring into those rules and roles that lock us into place. And let's keep challenging them. So that's still something you can do as an individual. But as you know, Nicole and Jake, it's rules, roles, and ideas, a couples exercise. Like it requires a couple to sit down and say, what are the rules, the implicit rules that guide our relationship? What are the roles we play? And what are the identities we bring into this relationship that lock us in? And let's reevaluate all it. Well, first of all, the rules, like do these rules still support us where we're at presently? Maybe they did when we first got together dating, when we first got married, when we first had our first kid. Great, no judgment. But like, do they still support us now? And I would say probably in my experience, like 90% of the rules don't.
Yeah.
They're legacy from earlier times, from unconscious processes we brought in from our family of origin or religion or life process, all that kind of good stuff. So like, whoa, let's excavate them. Let's look at them. Let's have a conscious conversation. And let's figure out the new rules that guide us. And that's in and of itself, feedback I've gotten from couples is a fun process. Or like, holy moly, I didn't realize some of you, like, you thought the Old Testament was bad with rules. Like we had so many rules guiding us and they're no longer serving us. It's like, let's create some new rules that serve us consciously, that we reevaluate a year from now because they might not serve us. Let's look at the roles. Like maybe we need to shift things up and have people more playful and fun. Yeah. And how are we locking each other's identities into place? Oh, that's just who he is. That's just who she is. And can we give space for the other person to grow and develop? But Jake, it goes back to what you just said earlier. It's like we need to have space for that kind of cool conversation to happen. So the coupledom can come together and recreate itself. Like it's almost like a born again process, really, literally all the time. Not necessarily every day, but like almost every day. But can you come, this cup half full, half empty? Well, shoot, let's not have a cup. Let's just have some fun and play. Let's put things into boxes. We do that. Because we have a tendency to turn other people into rocks. That's just who he is. That's just who she is. That's just who I am. But imagine if you were more like a child with a curiosity and the playful, fun approach to life that they had before we kind of destroyed that in children. And you took that approach to your relationship, both of you and your spouse. And then you took that approach as a couple to your family. And can I give you one example of
Please.
Okay. This was touching. Like, I about 6 months ago, I heard from a client of mine, and I just work with him as an individual. And he came to me, put it this way, kind of gung-ho, that kind of stuff. But I listened to him really closely, and I was like, I don't know that he needs more gung-ho stuff in his life. Like, he doesn't need to be more effective and efficient and 20x all his stuff. I'm like, but I listened closely, and he was talking about his relationship to his son. And like, his son didn't like him. He doesn't really like spending time with his son because he's always in conflict. I'm like, wow, like his son's going to be 10 years from now going to be in therapy to deal with this stuff. Like, this is horrible. So I'm like, I work with him, forget all the 20x stuff. I just work with him. It's like, hey, can you see the world from your son's eyes? How your son at 7 or 9 years old, I think he's 7, sees the world. He's like, no. It's like, well, just start playing around with that. Just see if you can get inside of his shoes, not from your perspective as a 37-year-old adult, but like how your son might see things. And then can you also look at what he does that you become the authority figure over and tell him, do this, and you can make it more playful. What do you mean? I said, well, he gave me an example, like his son spilled milk, literally spilled milk. It's not just a cliche, but he spilled milk and he yelled at his son, quit making a mess, go clean it up, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, well, of course your son's not going to like you if you're screaming, yelling at him. He probably didn't make the mess unintentionally. So then he's going to be afraid to like act in the world because he's afraid of making a mistake for his father to yell at him. So I'm like, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm thinking in my head. How can we turn this around? So I said, hey, next time he spills milk, make it a game. Like, don't take it like he spilled milk because he's trying to piss you off because most likely he didn't. He was an accident. But like, hey, can you guys make a game out of this to clean it up? So like he started making these things where he's the authority figure and telling the kid what to do, and he started kind of breaking his rigidity down and his contractions and started being playful and making games of it. And I got an email from him 6 months ago, and his relation with his son is like shot to the moon. They do things every week together. They have so much fun. Every quarter they go do things like father-son adventures. They went to Baja and they went, I don't know what you do in Baja, but like, you know, they're traveling around doing stuff together, but on a regular weekly basis, they're enjoying each other's company.
Yeah.
I'm excited that this podcast is brought to you by mkforhealth.com. Have you been looking for a powerful antioxidant to help support your immune health? Hello, of course we have. Look no further. mkforhealth.com offers an amazing product called Nutrimetrics OPC3. This product is an isotonic-capable food supplement chock full of powerhouse antioxidants. Ingredients like citrus extract bioflavonoids, bilberry, grapeseed, red wine, and pine bark extracts, all incredible antioxidants. Then you have the OPCs. The oligomeric proanthocyanidins are bioflavonoids found in fruits, vegetables, and certain tree barks that have exceptional benefit to the human body. Studies have shown that these OPCs are up to 20 times more powerful than vitamin C and 50 times more powerful than vitamin E in neutralizing free radicals. Hello, sign me up for that. Nutrimetrics OPC3 also contains the only isotonic form of pygaginol in the world. Number 1, remember, isotonic, readily absorbed. Number 2, pygaginol, my new favorite word, is a natural plant extract from the bark of a French maritime pine tree, and it is the most clinically researched and potent bioflavonoid found. If you're ready to support your immune health and modulate inflammation in your system, all with incredible powerhouse antioxidants, natural extracts, and ingredients, this is your product. Go to www.mkforhealth.com to purchase your Nutrimetrics OPC3 today. That's www.mk4health.com.
Yeah. I'm so glad you used that example because I think, for better or worse, I love that you use the word turn that person into a rock, because we become so freaking serious oftentimes as adults. And it doesn't mean that there isn't serious work to be done. It just means that there's this whole other thing that we also still get to do. And it's really fun and exciting. And when we think about like the family system, at the end of the day, all of us in every role in the family are looking for connection. Period. And if the moments of connection that we have with our spouse, with our children are, and they don't feel good every single time, we're never going to feel connected. So I love that you gave this example of like this whole other way that we can approach really any of the family relationships with our spouse, with our children, as a method of really getting to that heart of what we're looking for at the end, which is the connection. What a beautiful example.
Thank you. And having studied pre and perinatal psychology and stuff, and looking at attachment styles, I would, and this is going to be a possibility, but I'd love to put us all out of business to some degree or another. Because I would imagine if we learn to bond with our newborn babies differently than we do, we can get into a whole medicalization of birth and industrialization of the pregnancy, which I have concerns about. But if we just did the bonding with our babies differently and our children differently, and then even as they get older, like the example I just gave, then you create children who become adults who then can relate to their own children so much differently. You're breaking intergenerational patterns. And no judgment. There are moments where I have judgments on people's patterns. I'm like, oh, wait, come on, dude. I have my own S going on too, right? Mm-hmm. So I try not to be judgmental. I try to put all that stuff aside and realize, most people do their best. They learn from their parents. They learn from their parents and learn from their parents and their cultures and their religion and stuff like that. If we can break some of those patterns, so the rigidity in the systems is lessened and there's more playful, fun, human connection, love, care, and compassion. Man, you're talking about changing the world.
Yeah.
I just got goosebumps. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
But Michael,
Yeah.
And to the point of that too, like if you're yelling at your kid, right? Like again, and relating this to sports, it's like when you come back to the bench in a hockey game, your coach is like, "Why'd you make that pass?" And you're like, "Well, you as a player already know you screwed up, right?" Like same thing. Like if the kid spills the milk, how much of that is our own mask being put on of like, we got our own stuff, and that milk triggered me as a dad to be like, "Rah."
Yeah.
Right. Like
Well,
to your point of earlier of like, there's that hierarchy of like bring that into that dynamic, right? Like if you're not working on yourself, if you don't realize that you got all these things going on, then you spout off at your 10-year-old kid for spilling milk, which in anybody's logical mind sounds so stupid. Like he's a kid. He accidentally tipped it over, and then here we are as parents like, because we got to clean it up or whatever. It's crazy when you think about it, but it's like, and am I thinking about that right? I mean, is that kind of self stuff going on of why we react that way?
well, yeah, so most people react the way they, and I like the word react. I think that's perfect because it's not responsive. Responsive is by choice. I can choose what I'm doing. Most people react because that's what their nervous system has been trained to do prenatally, postnatally, into their adulthood, however they happen, what age they happen to be. But these are patterns of survival that are inculcated in us, probably from around conception. I mean, we can get into the conversation when it kicks in, but at least birth forward, these are patterns that are ingrained in our nervous system to help us survive in the world. And we learn, and they're passed down intergenerationally, right? Yes. And how do we break that pattern? First, we have to acknowledge we have these things going on inside of us. And, us as coaches, you guys are coaches, we teach this in the coaching program. Like all coaches should be in therapy or in coaching. Why? Because, yeah, of course, you don't want to yell at a 5-year-old, treating them like they're a 25-year-old because they're not going to know any better. And but that's what we do because that's what we're taught to do. But like if you're an adult working with an adult and you're triggered, because I get triggered in coaching. Like they say something like, "Holy shit," it lights me up, and somehow, if I'm not aware of myself being lit up, somehow I'm going to bring that crap into my coaching with my client. That's not good. So like, I need to develop as a coach the awareness, like, okay, he or she said this, I'm triggered, I need to bring this out, work on it, so I'm not bringing that crap into my own therapy, into my own coaching work. Same with being a parent, same with being a coach, same with being a friend, same with being a spouse. It's like you need to first have the awareness, like, oh God, my wounds, I'm being triggered, here we go. And I don't want to show up from the wounded place. I need to heal those wounds. Now it's a process and it's onions, so you're constantly working through it. That's why I love, Jake, what you said earlier. It's like, wow, like, you show up one way with your kid and a couple years later, you're going to show up a little bit differently because you're growing and developing, which gives them permission to see like, oh, this is a never ending process. My daddy grows and develops, learns new things, makes mistakes, learns along the way. My mom does, blah, 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 blah. I can do the same thing.
Yeah.
Awareness is the key, is the first step.
Yeah, I always say awareness is a superpower, and then everything else flows from that. And there's been so many times where the word has been close to spoken, but it has come up for me so many times, which is the freedom that this work gives you to choose a life that feels nourishing to you, not based on somebody else's story, not based on what society says is supposed to be right for you, but the freedom to choose. And even if, like in the example of the anger, which Michael knows I get to have lots of fun with, in the example of the anger, like where are the places where I notice that I feel angry, but I'm going to choose that as my response because it is useful to me in this scenario. Whereas what we've just been discussing is where we're not free to choose it. There's nothing about our system that's making a choice. It is just like rising up and coming out. And that the freedom to choose, like that is just, it changes the whole of somebody's life. And that is the gift of doing this work, both as an N of one, but also in the couple and in the family. It's just like, oh my gosh, unleashing the awesomeness inside.
I love freedom is one of my favorite words. So yeah, I love the freedom, the responsiveness as opposed to reactiveness. But it's interesting because in that space of freedom, so many possibilities emerge. Like I think like creativity is almost at the flowness of freedom. Like you have the freedom and the curiosity. Creativity can emerge because like you're in a relationship with your spouse, and like, oh, here are the 4 options maybe that are okay, but like, holy, really? If we were both free, or not free, because we always have some kind of man behind the thing pulling our strings a little bit, but freer, like, then we go from like 5 options to 500 options. Like, ooh, why do we have to do it one of these 3 ways or 4 ways? We can try multiple different ways of doing this, whatever this is.
Yeah.
And think how fun that would be. That's one of the reasons and I know you interviewed Dana. Like, the unschooling thing is so interesting to me. It's not for everyone. I get that. Nothing's for everyone. But like, the freedom to allow, in this case, a child to explore life and facilitate that discovery for them. And God knows where it's going to take them. That is so awesome. But imagine having that same freedom, as you just said, Nicole, inside your marriage. You can explore and practice, and of one, like, let's do it. No, that didn't work. Okay, let's try this. Let's try it. Oh, that's really cool. It's like, man, talking about enjoying spending time with your family and spouse, because you're just playful and curiosity and creative, and it's cool.
But isn't that like such a I think what came to me when you were saying that too, right? Of like, you give the freedom, you kind of diminish the laws or the rules to allow that kind of creativity to take place, but it's to achieve full potential. It's not to be like, oh, I'm just going to waddle through life and do whatever I want and why I want, right? It's like you're almost like taking
total
away
potential.
Yeah. You're taking away those laws or those rules that have been like given to us by other people, right? So that then we get the space to like bleed ourselves dry. Do you see what I'm saying? Kind of like, I think that message can get lost sometimes in our society of like, oh, I can do whatever I want. I'll just kind of float through and blah, blah, blah. It's like you're still trying to achieve super high standard for your life to, like, God gave us all of this stuff to really get after it,
Yeah, it's a life of excellence. So I completely agree with you. And hey, if someone wants to be a libertine and go do whatever they want to do, hey, free country, for the most part, they can do that. My message to them is like, I don't think that's the best use of your time, energy, and life. Like, can you learn to be free in the context of the relationships you're in, or the ones you want to be in? So it's not just like, oh, I'm free of all constraints of the culture I live in, the rules, the laws, regulations, and stuff. And I can do whatever the F I want. Okay, great. Like, that's like adolescence freedom. And maybe it's necessary. Like, okay, that's a nice first step. Like, I'm free. I can do what I want. Cool. But like, if you look at Wilber's developmental stages, egocentric to sociocentric to world-centric, like, okay, great. You're egocentrically free. Great. Okay. But there's more to life than you and your needs. What about your family, your spouse, and your kids? And then you can even go beyond the sociocentric, beyond your little tribe, and say, hey, what about all human beings? And you can go beyond that to all sentient beings. Cool. Like, let's be a little bit more expansive and inclusive as we grow and develop. So it's not just about me. I'm against authority. Like, that's pre-conventional in many cases. It's about me. It's like, you can be against authority. You can question authority if it's quick. I mean, you can do it anyhow you want, but like, you can do it because you want to free yourself to be the most loving, caring person possible in the relationships you're in or you want to be in.
Yeah, I love that.
As opposed to like, I don't want to get crass on the family call, but yeah, okay. I'll stop there.
Yeah. No, I get that. I love it. Okay, Michael, we could like really go on, and you have like so much just wisdom to share. And I know that, I've experienced like super amazing transformation from working with you and, being exposed to the work that you do through, really incredible organizations. Specifically, I've gotten to experience Emergent Human and Unbeatable Mind, but where should people go to find more about working with you and the podcast, like all the good stuff that you're doing?
So www.michaeldostrolenk is my website. It talks about my coaching approach with individuals, couples, groups, et cetera, et cetera. It also has a list of some of the projects I work with. As you know, I work for SEAL Fit, Parent Center for Human Potential, Spartan 7. I wear a million different hats.
A lot of
You'll find all the information there. I'm on Twitter, M Ostrolenk, Instagram, M Ostrolenk. LinkedIn, Facebook. Each of the I probably spend way too much time on some of the platforms, but I also do the platform work for some of the companies I work for. So I'll acknowledge that. I'm trying to do better there. But I follow you on Instagram. On Instagram, I put out some, hopefully some motivational things to think about life. And on Saturdays, I talk about our transition dog, Cleona the bulldog. But beyond that, and then on Twitter, I try to be uplifting and put out good research is going on in the mental health or physical medicine space or spiritual practices. It's kind of uplift people. But I'll say this: I went to an ancestral health conference, 2008, I think it was 11 or 12. And this guy from the audience comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, I follow you on Twitter." I was like, "Hey, thanks for following me on Twitter." He's like, "You put out great stuff, but what happens to you twice a year?" I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about twice a year." He goes, "You seem to get really angry twice a year." I was like, "Okay." I do policy work. I retired from public policy work last year, but for 20 years I did public policy work. So yeah, twice a year I get really angry at some of the politicians who are doing really dumbass shit. Besides that, I try to put out mostly uplifting things.
Awesome. Well, we'll be sure to link your website and all the social handles and all that good stuff in our show notes. But just like from the bottom of my heart, thanks so much for sharing this time together today. I just, you do amazing work. And I think the transformation that becomes available for anyone willing to step into it is really remarkable. And so I just thank you for sharing it here with us today. And we'll catch everyone next time. Michael, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. It's an honor to be with you guys.
Yeah. All right, you guys, thanks so much for listening in. We will catch you next time.